On March 19, 2026, China's foreign minister called for peace in the Middle East. Routine diplomacy. Except within weeks, Beijing signed energy deals across Southeast Asia, pledged to cover 18% of the Philippines' fertilizer imports, and dispatched an envoy through every major Gulf capital. China isn't sitting out the Iran war. It's winning it without firing a single shot, and the strategy behind that restraint is far more deliberate than you think. Wang Yi, China's foreign minister, picked up the phone on March 19, 2026, and delivered a line that would echo far beyond diplomatic circles. Against the backdrop of today's volatile and turbulent international situation, China-UK relations must move forward and not regress. As permanent members of the United Nations Security Council and responsible major powers, China and the United Kingdom shoulder the important international responsibilities of world peace, stability, and development. That phrase, responsible major powers, did not just land in a single press release. It was broadcast on Xinhua, repeated on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs portal, and splashed across CGTN's social feeds within hours. The message was clear. China was stepping into the frame as the stabilizer, the adult in the room, the country that would keep the world from sliding off the rails. But here is the catch. This was not just a one-off gesture. The phrase responsible major country has become a fixture in Beijing's diplomatic vocabulary. It is the kind of language that signals, subtly but unmistakably, that China wants to be seen as the indispensable mediator. The official Ministry of Foreign Affairs summary hammered home the point, urging all sides to seek a ceasefire through dialogue, to preserve multilateralism, to accelerate peace. No threats, no ultimatums, just the steady drumbeat of peacemaking, amplified by every state-linked outlet in China's media arsenal. This is the playbook. Project neutrality. Lean into the optics of restraint and let the world's attention settle on China as the one power not escalating the crisis. Wang Yi's words are not just diplomatic wallpaper. They are the opening move in a strategy where rhetoric comes first and real leverage follows. When Beijing calls for peace, it is not just talking to diplomats, it is setting the terms for what comes next. On March 4th, as oil tankers idled off the Strait of Hormuz and fertilizer prices spiked across Asia, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a statement that barely rippled through Western headlines. The language was dry. China would strengthen coordination with Southeast Asian countries on energy security. But behind that line was a concrete offer, one that would redraw the region's supply map. Within 24 hours, executives from China National Petroleum Corporation and Indonesia's Pertamina signed a memorandum in Jakarta, anchoring a framework for oil stock sharing. The ink was barely dry on the March 5th deal before China's pipeline to Southeast Asia widened. It didn't stop at oil. As Gulf fertilizer shipments stalled, the Chinese ambassador in Manila, Jiang Wei, stepped up. On March 10th, he pledged that China would guarantee stable fertilizer supplies for the Philippines, promising rapid shipments from state-owned producers. It wasn't just talk. By mid-March, Philippine customs cleared Chinese fertilizer through a new fast-track protocol, and import statistics told the real story. Nearly half of the country's fertilizer now arrived on Chinese vessels, up from 18% just months before. These moves weren't charity. Each new contract and pledge turned a supply crisis into a dependency. While global supply chains buckled, China was quietly filling the gaps, offering lifelines that came with strings attached. In a world where the loudest voices called for peace, the real leverage was built in shipping manifests and customs ledgers. Ambassador Jiang Wei's assurance wasn't just a promise, it was a down payment on future influence. The rhetoric of restraint set the stage, but the real game played out in the fine print of trade agreements and the steady flow of goods rerouted through Chinese channels. Jun stepped off the plane in Riyadh on April 15, 2026, and by the end of his Gulf tour, he had logged meetings in 5 capitals and left a trail of carefully crafted statements behind him. The official line was always the same: China is a responsible major country, ready to listen, ready to help, but never taking sides. In Saudi Arabia, Jai urged all parties to exercise restraint and pressed for what he called a durable ceasefire. 2 days later, in Abu Dhabi, the joint statement with the UAE Foreign Ministry pointed to deepening friendship and support for UN peace initiatives. Bahrain's Ministry of Foreign Affairs reported that Jai emphasized China's role as a responsible major power. Each stop, a variation on the same script: neutrality, friendship, and just enough moral signaling to stay above the fray. But there is a twist to this choreography. On March 8th, back in Beijing, Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that a ceasefire and end to hostilities provide the fundamental solution. The wording was deliberate, repeated in every press briefing, and designed to sound like common sense. Yet, when Israeli strikes killed an Iranian official in April, China's foreign ministry went a step further, stating it was shocked by the violence and condemning the attack. Not a word about sanctions, not a threat, just a public display of outrage that cost Beijing nothing and bought credit in Arab capitals. This is what managed neutrality looks like in practice. Jun's itinerary reads like a blueprint for access. The more the region fractures, the more every capital wants China at the table. By the time Jai returned to Beijing on May 3rd, the architecture of neutrality was no longer just rhetoric. It was a diplomatic web, one where China, by refusing to pick a side, had quietly made itself indispensable to all of them. November 2025, Tokyo. Sanae Takaichi, Japan's finance minister, stood before the Diet and did not mince words. She said that for the first time in decades, the alliance between the US and Japan faces real uncertainty. The remark landed like a warning shot, echoing through policy circles from Washington to Canberra. That same month, Donald Trump, angling for a second act in the White House, told reporters that Japan had been a great partner, maybe the best. But praise only gets you so far, and let us see what she says when we meet. The implication was unmistakable. Alliances were now bargaining chips, not bedrock. Beijing watched this unease ripple outward. Then, in April 2026, Chinese police in Hubei province announced the arrest of a fentanyl precursor ring, an operation that on paper targeted a handful of mid-level chemists. The US State Department called the arrests a gesture of good faith. Inside the Beltway, analysts saw the move for what it was: a low-cost concession, perfectly timed. China had traded a handful of arrests for diplomatic credit, with no real risk at home. This is the pattern. Every time an alliance wobbles, Beijing steps in with a calculated gesture, just enough to be noticed, never enough to cost real leverage. The goodwill is not free, it is transactional, and the price is paid in influence, not in blood or treasure. As alliances fray and the headlines focus on military flashpoints, China is quietly rewriting the rules of power projection. One favor, one subtle threat, one well-timed arrest at a time. Inside China, the machinery of economic defense has been running at full tilt. In the first 2 months of 2026, government expenditure jumped by 6% compared to the previous year, a surge not seen since the early pandemic. The Ministry of Finance's monthly report, released quietly on March 15th, spells it out. More funds for infrastructure, energy storage, and food reserves, all designed to absorb external shocks before they reach the street. The People's Bank of China, meanwhile, issued its annual work plan in February, promising a moderately loose monetary policy and basic stability of the renminbi. Those phrases are not just central bank boilerplate. They are a signal to the market that Beijing is ready to cushion any blow from abroad, whether it is a spike in oil prices or a sudden freeze in Western capital flows. But the most telling move comes from the industrial side. In January, the State Council and the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology issued a joint notice to the electric vehicle sector, China's pride and export engine. The order was to crack down on involution, the self-destructive price wars that have flooded the market with discount electric vehicles. Instead, companies are being nudged to consolidate at home and go big overseas. The message is clear. In a world scrambling for stability, China is building a firewall around its core industries and then using those same industries to project strength outward. These are not just defensive measures. They are the foundation for a new kind of leverage, one that turns domestic resilience into international power, even as the rest of the world is distracted by war. On February 28, 2026, Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang sat down with the UAE President's special envoy in Beijing. The joint communiqué that followed was short on poetry, but long on implication. Both sides pledged to push for a Gaza ceasefire, revive UN-led talks, and coordinate a new peace track between China and UAE inside the Gulf Cooperation Council. No threats, no ultimatums, just a handshake and a promise to deepen cooperation while the rest of the world was still counting missile strikes. The real story is what does not get said. As the conflict drags on, China's trade surplus keeps widening, $12 billion higher in the first half of 2026, according to IMF estimates. Chinese-flagged ships now move nearly a fifth of all Red Sea freight, up from 12% before the war. Foreign exchange reserves tick up by billions, fueled by discounted oil and new export markets pried open, while Western rivals are distracted. It is a pattern with precedent. After the 2008 financial crash, China's own $560 billion stimulus and a 30% jump in exports to Africa and the Middle East turned a global crisis into a springboard. The longer the Middle East stays unstable, the more China profits from the image of restraint without firing a shot. But here is the question nobody in Beijing will answer. How long can this balancing act last? At some point, a war that keeps getting worse will force a choice. The longer China rides the middle, the more leverage it gains, but the harder the fall if neutrality finally snaps. As Western diplomats trade statements, Beijing quietly locks in new energy routes and fertilizer deals. No missiles, just leverage. China's neutrality now shapes global supply chains, not just headlines. The real question is, when influence grows this quietly, who notices before the balance tips? Drop your thoughts below.